Hello and welcome to Moments in History. I'm Linda Shenton-Matchett, author, speaker, and history geek. While researching my stories, I unearth tons of intriguing information that doesn't end up in my books. So I've created this channel to share those tidbits with you. I really appreciate you stopping by. Today, I'll be talking about requisitioned homes in Britain during the Second World War. Intriguingly, the use of country homes for a wide variety of purposes had been carefully planned by the government long before the war commenced. As it became increasingly clear in the mid-1930s that armed conflict with Hitler's Germany was inevitable, resources were mobilized toward the war effort. This involved building up the armed forces, rearmament, and plans for the home front. At a meeting of the Imperial Defense Committee on April 15, 1937, it was decided that secret surveys should be undertaken of the buildings that could be used for the war effort, and then the information fed into a central requisitioning register. This was made the responsibility of the Office of Works, which set up a special Directorate of Lands and Accommodations based in London. The actual surveying was delegated to local Office of Work representatives. The register began in May of 1938 and was divided into 4 areas: London, English counties, which included Northern Ireland and the Channel Islands, Wales, and Scotland. The aim was to ensure that buildings needed for war purposes would be available and there would be no overlapping between government departments. The requisitioning register was kept secret until the outbreak of war, although chief constables and clerks to county councils were informed and given copies for their areas. Government premises, railways, hospitals, food stores, and small houses, meaning something with less than 4 bedrooms, were exempt. Commercial buildings, although not formally exempt, were unaffected for the most part because of the amount of compensation involved. Country houses were restricted mainly for the use of military or evacuees and were by far the largest number of properties requisitioned. Most of the civil service departments were pointed toward large schools, hotels, and semi-public building. The military was told to focus on country homes, and requisitioning for the military purposes was carried out directly by the War Department through regimental quartering commandants on a county basis. Country homes, simply put, are those properties owned by individuals who also owned houses in cities, called townhomes. Having the 2 properties allowed the individuals to spend time in the country and in the city, hence the terms to distinguish between town and country. However, the term also encompasses houses that were, and often still are, the full-time residence for the landed gentry, a class of people who live entirely off the rental income of cottages associated with their estate. Many of these country homes were built during the second half of Elizabeth I's reign and her successor James I, when the first architect-designed mansions, thought of today as English country houses, began to make their appearance. Some are the work of only one architect or designer, built in a relatively short, particular time. However, the majority of the country houses, often owned at different times by gentlemen and peers, are an evolution of one or more styles with facades and wings in different styles and built over a period of years, sometimes decades or even centuries. The uses of the homes are as varied as the properties themselves: barracks, home for evacuees, schools, hospitals, works of art storage, strategic and military headquarters, billets and training premises, even prisoner of war camps. Although very few English country houses were destroyed as a direct result of enemy action, a large number were irreparably damaged by their wartime occupants. Fire was a particular hazard at a time when everyone smoked. A percentage of the houses were left in such poor condition in 1945, they seemed beyond restoration. Without proper maintenance, pipes burst, ceilings collapsed, and dry rot rampaged everywhere. The 1,000 or so country homes demolished in the decade that followed the war were largely delayed war losses and were a direct result of wartime mistreatment. In his book Requisitioned, author John Martin Robinson indicates that these homes' destruction can be compared to the dissolution of the monasteries in the 16th century. He goes on to say, quote, "The damage caused by troops in particular has become part of English folklore. Horror stories abound of staircases chopped up for firewood, paintings and paneling used as dartboards, jeeps and armored vehicles driven into lakes, up staircases, through gate piers and stone balustrades, carved or painted graffiti, smashed windows and internal fixtures, gardens concreted over, statues beheaded, and conservatories machine gunned. Most of those stories are true." End quote. As a result, many requisitioned houses were never privately lived in again after the war. Some families lost everything, house and estate. Hundreds of houses were demolished as a direct result of the wartime damage. Homes were abandoned by their owners who could not afford to repair them or were too discouraged to consider the task. Some landowners preferred to offer their houses, as they had in the First World War, out of a sense of public duty and patriotism. However, perhaps they also felt they might have more control over the fate of their house if offered for a particular purpose that came with a set of conditions. Many owners favored schools, assuming they would be less likely to cause damage than soldiers, especially girls' schools, prep schools, and nursery schools. Another favorite of house owners was to take on storage of works of art from the national museums. Many of these owners themselves were trustees of galleries, museums, and libraries, and knew curators personally. Author Robinson comments in his introduction that, quote, "Like many bureaucratic entities, the requisitioning register looked well on paper, but did not, in the end, relate very closely to life on the ground. The Air Ministry earmarked 5,000 premises, but occupied 20,000, reflecting the enormously expanded role of the RAF as the war progressed. The Board of Education, 4,000 premises, but only occupied 3,000. The Ministry of Health asked for 30,000 premises, but took only 18,500. Mercifully, there were fewer casualties than expected. Only the Admiralty was on target. It requested 2,800 premises and occupied all of them." End quote. The Compensation Defense Act of 1939 laid down payment guidelines for owners and was based on a reasonable market rent. In the case of Army requisitions, this was fixed by their own in-house values. In other cases, by the district valuer, a county council official. Unsurprisingly, the owners nearly always had a higher expectation of the value of their property than they were paid, and no account was taken of loss of amenity or general depreciation. Additionally, the concept of architectural or historic interest played no part in the government's plan for requisitioning country homes. In 1939, there was no statutory list of buildings of special architecture or historical interest. The programming for preserving historic buildings in Britain was created after the war and partly provoked by wartime ruin. Not all wartime uses were equally disruptive. Art treasures in schools were the best tenants, as mentioned previously. However, also as mentioned, the main occupants of requisitioned homes were the armed forces, and they were the most dreaded. Many houses were occupied by successive waves of different military organizations and regiments, and fighting men of all nationalities. Some treated houses better than others, but as Welsh architect Clough Williams Ellis remarked, "Their last tenants, our own British Army, too often reduced them to virtual ruin." Even without deliberate vandalism, overlarge fires, heavy boots, and constant smoking of cigarettes all caused damage. The South and West were particularly favored by the military after Dunkirk. However, there were regional variations in the concentration of troops. For example, the Canadians were mainly housed in Kent, Sussex, and Hampshire. Of all the requisitioned country homes, Bletchley Park is perhaps the most well-known. Over 12,000 people worked there over the course of the war and played an integral part in breaking the German secret Enigma code. Located in Buckinghamshire, 50 miles northwest of London, Bletchley had been slated for demolition and redevelopment before the war to provide a new suburb. But thanks to its wartime service, the home is now fully preserved as a museum. The original mansion was erected by Brown Willis in 1711, but torn down in 1793 by the next owner, Thomas Harrison. The home was named Bletchley Park by architect Samuel Lipscomb Seacombe when he purchased the property in 1877. Sir Herbert Samuel Lyon purchased the property in 1883 and expanded it by combining Victorian Gothic, Tudor, and Dutch Baroque styles. The 581 acres estate was purchased by a developer in 1937 after the death of Sir Lyon's widow, Fanny. However, the following year, Admiral Sir Hugh Sinclair, head of the Secret Intelligence Services, bought the mansion and 58 acres for £6,000 of his own money when the government said they didn't have the budget. Sinclair felt that Bletchley's geographical centrality, proximity to the railway station that fed Oxford and Cambridge, and the high volume of communication links at the telegraph and telephone repeater station in nearby Fenny Stratford made it the perfect location for his organization. The house was ultimately not large enough for the required staff, so 18 temporary wooden and 8 brick huts were constructed on the grounds. Bletchley Park is just one example of thousands of country homes doing its bit for the war effort. Author Robinson closes his introduction by touting the grit and perseverance of the next generation to restore and revive the ragtag properties. He lauds their determination to make a go of it, without lots of servants, using just make do and mend, their own labor and estate builders. Using old or second-hand furnishings or army surplus, they brought interiors back to life. They lived comfortably in part of their house while opening the main rooms to the public. Beginning with Chatsworth, Longleat, and Arundel in 1947, an increasing number threw open their doors every year through the 1950s and 1960s. Often it was undertaken to make houses eligible for repair grants, but it provided them with an additional means of upkeep. Nearly all the larger homes that took this step survived and flourished. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. If you'd like to learn even more history, please stop by my blog, found on my website at www.lindashentonmatchett.com. And please consider subscribing to my YouTube and Spotify Moments in History channels to see and hear new episodes that release on the second and fourth Friday of each month. Thanks for stopping by. Have a great rest of your day.